we can't just leave people hanging and tell them what the problem is. And it's terrible. The project ran into a corner. It's done.
Well, I mean, it's the question of democracy from below, too, and taking much more seriously what democracy from below looks like. And I think that the student movement, because it had access to like all of this scientific knowledge, and this is what my critique in a sense is, like, it uses the social science to come up with a theory of the problem of Ethiopia's integration into the global capitalist systems, but it doesn't have a theory of what democracy from below actually looks like, and it doesn't actually even really think that that's a serious question. It doesn't really try to develop that question, right? And that seems to be the issue that is common throughout the African continent, which is what I think Mamdani is talking about, is how do we link the rural to the city in ways that are democratic and don't just flip-flop between this sort of democratic, sort of this what's the term that Mamdani uses? Decentralized despotism and centralized authoritarianism, right? So how do we actually overcome that dichotomy? And I think that's about democracy from below, which needs to be thought about in a much more serious manner. Yeah.
So on that, and I think unless Will has more questions, I'll just throw this one out then. So the challenge then is to come up with a political project that would do that. The problem, and I think when I read the debate on the roundtable on Diplo, which I can recommend to people, old and young, who writes on Africa as a country, he edited a series of reviews of your book, Samar Obalushi, also on Africa as a country. You're giving lots of shouts out. It's a great series. I'd recommend it. But one of the things there was is that all of what you describe about the student movement in the 1970s, it takes place. They're not in isolation. A lot of them are in the U.S., some in Ethiopia, they're in Europe, whatever. I think so. If the question is what kind of politics has to emerge, if we can offer something, from what we can see is that obviously once again it's heavily influenced. Also, Ethiopia is not happening right now in isolation. Like the politics of Ethiopia happens with all kinds of discourses influencing it. I mean, for one, I think Black Lives Matter discourse is heavily, it's layering the politics of Ethiopia right now. And I'm curious as to we don't want to get into names and whatever and Technicolor Dreamcoat jackets, but I'm curious as to how you see where that politics, where could a reasonable pro-poor progressive politics emerge, and can you say something about how to maneuver, not maneuver necessarily, but how do you find your way amidst all these noises to make sense of
it's very difficult. I mean, I had to go, do a PhD to figure out how to think about it in politics. Right? I mean, it's like a kind of dark space, and you just have to enter it. It's and then maybe you can figure it out after years of thinking about it. And that's because what dominates politics today in Ethiopia is a kind of ethnic populism, which is really different from the ways in which the nationalities questions was really trying to think about questions of uneven development and so on, right? And capitalism, right? What we have now in Ethiopia is just this sense of primordial identities fighting each other out through this kind of populism, right? I would say populism is the primary framework in which I would think about what's going on in Ethiopia, and everybody's participating in it. The people who hate each other and the people who are taking power, whatever. It's just all of this kind of primordial ethnicity, identity being flung against each other, right? So that there's some kind of problem of populism. But I mean, the other thing.
You think that's because the EPDRF destroyed? Well, this is rough, and I'm being maybe unfair. Is it because they were associated with the left, with that sort of Marxist left? I think you may have said at some point it's ironic that most people who are left in the world right now are also people of color, are often Black people of the so-called global South. So it's in some ways it's interesting that why we have this kind of the politics take this kind of ethnic populism, rather than that other kind of left politics, which I think I would have preferred. So do you think that it's because maybe the EPDRF just like made that project, like, I don't know, it discredited that project so much that people cannot see something better than this kind of ethno-socialism right now?
There's the problem of like the comprador bourgeoisie as well, right? Like, don't forget, like, so much of the discourse that comes out of Ethiopia is shaped by precisely this centralized authoritarianism that comes from the city, right? And they are very much ashamed of the Marxist tradition in Ethiopia. They're like, we have to enter the modern world. This Marxism is backwards. It belongs to a different era, and so on, right? So there's that dynamic as well, right? So the thing about the ways in which Ethiopian politics gets talked about now is like as if the intellectual traditions that have shaped the problematics don't matter anymore, right? As if there are no ideas to actually be contested. It's just evil force against good force against evil force, and it's really hard to know who's the evil force and the good force because there's no ideas here, right? And we don't know what the genealogy of these problems actually are, right? So yeah, all right. I think we're exhausting you. Yeah, people are people are coming up with more and more questions. I think we'll have the last word.
I want to ask one more question, which is, Ethiopia is in the news a lot lately as we opened, and there's a lot of conflict. But where are the struggles from below being waged in Ethiopia right now? To piggyback on what Sean said, if we want to look at something that has the prospects of being this democratizing force in Ethiopia right now, where do we look for that, and who's participating in that?
I mean, like I said, the reason why we even have this political crisis is because we had a kind of farmers movement, a land to the tiller movement, right? That was saying, you can't take our land, you can't privatize our land, we don't want your development. So that was really interesting, but what we have seen is that those demands were completely appropriated and somehow turned around, so that what we have is a regime that is, propagating which has really become a neoliberal state, right? And is interested in privatization and so on, right? Not really paying attention to those initial demands that came from farmers. So those demands still exist. They're just not being heard, and they don't necessarily have a venue through which to speak at the moment, right? But of course, they will erupt again. I mean, because those problems haven't gone away, right? So I'm sure we'll hear from those people again, right? In terms of actual social movements on the ground, I don't really know at the moment, like who's organizing what. I'm sure there's all kinds of things being organized, though.